All right, I have 104, so I think we're going to get things started since you all joined on time. Um, just as a reminder, we are recording this webinar along with a PDF of the slideshow will be available on our website next week. So both the video of what you're seeing as well as the PDF will be on our website for your use in the future. My name is Glenn Saponis, and I'd like to welcome you to this presentation. As I said, this is a webinar for our 2025 application workshop. In a few minutes, Stephanie will go over the format of the webinar, how to ask questions, and provide an overview and agenda for today's workshop. Next slide, please. But just as a reminder, the Trust's mission is to advance historic preservation in New Jersey for the benefit of future generations through education, stewardship, financial investment programs, of which you're applying for or looking to apply for today, that save our heritage and strengthen our communities. The funding of our grants, the Preserve New Jersey Fund, comes from a percentage of the corporate business tax. It's part of the constitutionally dedicated funds that fund both Green Acres, Blue Acres, farmland preservation, as well as the Historic Trust. Next slide, please. The Historic Trust is an in but not of agency of government. So while we are located and get support from the Department of Community Affairs, we have a separate board of trustees that govern our programs. The board is comprised of 12 citizen members appointed by the governor, as well as 3 ex officio members representing Department of Environmental Protection, Department of Treasury, as well as Department of Community Affairs. Next slide, please. So to just kind of give you a quick overview of the proposed schedule for the grant round, not of today's presentation, but of the full grant round. Applications for this round will be due Thursday, April 24th at 4 p.m. And 4 p.m. is a hard deadline. We're looking for both the applications, which are online applications, to be submitted by that point in time. We also expect to have the USB, the thumb drives with your attachments supplied to us by that time as well. I know some of this will be gone over later, but we also recommend if you're putting stuff in the mail, if you're putting the USB in the mail, get receipts, document when it was sent, just in case if, God forbid, there's something where it gets lost in the mail or something like that. So we highly recommend that you do get a receipt. Or again, we're here all day that Thursday or beforehand to accept the USBs in person. So by Friday, August 1st, we expect to all resources, either have proof that you've been certified eligible or are listed on the New Jersey or National Register. Again, this will be gone out over in more detail during this presentation today. Big chunk of time is May through September, where staff will be reviewing applications. They'll be going out to make site visits, as well as our evaluator panel will meet in September. Our evaluator panel is comprised of professionals in the field of historic preservation. Could be historic architects, preservationists, historians, that sort of stuff. They're from outside the state, so there's no conflicts of interest with what they're reviewing. And they're reading through the applications throughout this May, September. In September is when they all get together to discuss the applications in person. But in the meantime, they are reviewing all the applications during that time frame. By Thursday, September 25th, the Board of Trustees will take the recommendations of the Evaluator Panel and our Grants and Loans Committee to make its recommendations for final funding. This list goes to the Garden State Preservation Trust, which oversees us as well as Green Acres, Blue Acres, and they'll review the recommended list of projects, confirm that we do have the amount of money available to fund these projects. And then at that point, legislation is written for each individual project. There's a big list, and it goes to the legislature for passage in both the Senate and Assembly. Once that happens, then the governor signs it, and it becomes law. We can start doing grant agreements. Typically, we expect that by January to March, the governor will sign the legislation that had passed, and he'll sign it. Although, again, this is an estimate. We don't know exactly when. For those of you who have gotten grants last year, good news is the governor signed the legislation today. So we actually do have a signing date for the 2024 applications, which is great. So anyways, that's a brief look at the schedule for this time period. Also, I just want to let people know that We advertised the availability of $10 million for this grant round. In recent years, we have been fortunate enough to exceed this amount. This year, however, it is more likely that we'll be closer to that $10 million amount. So again, this makes for a very highly competitive grant round. So please pay attention to the presentation so that you could make your applications the strongest that they can be. Lastly, before we move on, there's been some recent developments regarding using state and/or county grant funds for the rehabilitation of churches. So I just want to give you kind of a brief update on how it affects our grants moving forward. So in 2018, the New Jersey Supreme Court ruled that state tax dollars cannot be used for the repair or maintenance of houses of worship. Doing so would violate the New Jersey Constitution. Just last year, in the fall of 2024, there was a ruling, a preliminary injunction by a U.S. District Court judge stating that you can't deny a church from applying for a grant simply because it is a religious institution. What is unclear under this ruling is what type of project can be funded with grant funds. So this ruling indicates that some projects may be eligible for funding so long as the project is not seen as an inherently religious or not funding purely religious iconography. Unfortunately, the ruling, neither of these things were specifically defined or considered in that ruling. So it still leaves a lot of gray area. So what does this mean with regard to your applying to the New Jersey Historic Trust during this grant round? If your project is in an active house of worship, your application or project will be reviewed by the Deputy Attorney General's office for the state to determine if the project is or is not in compliance with existing law. If it is determined to be in compliance, then the application will be considered along with all the other applications that have been determined eligible. If it is determined not to be in compliance, then the application will no longer be considered for that grant at that time. Unfortunately, the trust cannot make this determination. It must go to the Deputy Attorney General's office, and it's unclear how long this process is going to take. We just know that it's not an instantaneous ruling. So again, if you feel like you fit into this category, I suggest before you apply that you review the rulings. There are links to the rulings both in the guidelines as well as on our website to see exactly what those rulings say, and then judge for yourself on whether you think that you're in compliance or not in compliance. Again, this is for projects that are dealing with houses of worship, active houses of worship. Again, this only applies to active houses of worship. This would not apply to buildings that function at one point in time as a church, but now maybe a museum, a community center, or serve some other purpose. Next slide, please. So here's a list of our current staff. You will be hearing from many of them today during this presentation. They are all available to reach out at some point in time if you have any questions regarding the application process, specific questions about your project or your site. Feel free to reach out to any of them. Their contact information is located both on our website, and we'll be providing that later in this presentation as well. So again, I'd like to thank you for joining us today. Good luck with your application and your projects. And now I will turn over to Stephanie, who will start things off with today's agenda.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Stephanie, and I am a program officer here at the Trust. I'm going to get us started today by briefly going over our agenda and then giving an overview of our grant guidelines. So as Glenn was saying, this is a webinar, which means that the staff can't see or hear you as attendees. To communicate, we have access to a Q&A function at the bottom of the screen, and any questions you have can be typed into that designated section. We'll address any questions that are entered at the end of each section, as well as at the end of the webinar itself. We'll be able to answer questions either verbally or directly into the Q&A function. Any project-specific questions that you may have should be sent to the njht@dca.gov email, so you can be directed to a program officer who can better address your specific needs. Also, just to note, this presentation is being recorded and will be available on our website at some point next week. For your reference, our webpage is www.nj.gov/dca/njht, and the video will be located under the Resources tab at the top of our homepage. For our agenda today, I'm going to start us off by discussing our grant guidelines. We'll then move on to our archaeological requirements, go over each application type, including historic site management, municipal, county, and regional planning, heritage tourism, and capital. Once we finish going over each application type, we'll then go over the attachment requirements as well as how to set your application apart from others. At the end of the presentation, we'll answer any remaining questions, and we highly recommend that you stay with us until the end since all of these sections are pretty important in developing a successful application. So before I move on, I do want to note that the section I'm about to go through is just a brief overview, and my colleagues will be going into further detail later on in the presentation. So if you have questions related to a specific grant type, it may be best to ask questions when we get to that particular section later on in the presentation, as it'll most likely be answered then. So for our 2025 grant round this year, there are a few notables. We made some big changes to our applications last year, including historic site management, heritage tourism, municipal, county, and regional planning, and capital. And we've continued to make certain changes based on feedback from our applicants and staff. Our aim is to make the applications more concise by reducing redundancy throughout them, clarifying the information requested, including more examples, and limiting the word count for questions that may not need as detailed answers as others. We're also responding to the ever growing need to consider climate related impacts to historic sites by adding a climate section. And a brand new addition to the application this year is the archaeology section. The purpose of this section is for applicants to consider how archaeology affects their proposed project and how it could affect their site in the future. So I urge all applicants to review the PDF or Word documents of the applications, which can be found on our website under the Resources tab, before starting the online application on Form site to familiarize yourselves with them. For our capital grants, multi-phase requests now have their own section and grant type in the application under Capital Level 3 multi-phase. It's also important to note that for capital grants, the property will need to be listed on the New Jersey or National Register of Historic Places to be awarded a grant. If your property is not yet registered, please contact the Historic Trust to discuss this further with a program officer. This year, we also want to stress that applications must be submitted online with all supporting documents received on a USB by 4 p.m. April 24th to be accepted. And just like last year, we have our two special initiatives, including the 250th anniversary of the American Revolution and underrepresented histories. So our first special initiative is the semi-quincentennial, which is the 250th anniversary of the American Revolution, which will take place in 2026. As 2026 is right around the corner, we're striving to highlight and support sites and projects that will be participating in the semi-quincentennial. There are many sites in New Jersey that have rich connections to the American Revolution, so we ask that you demonstrate a tangible connection to the Revolution and explain to us how you'd be participating in the semi-quin. And this could include things such as new programming, events, or exhibits you have planned for 2026 relating to the revolution itself. Our second initiative is to highlight underrepresented histories. In response to the nation's reckoning with racial injustices and keeping in line with New Jersey's statewide preservation plan, we're seeking to expand representation of marginalized groups and empower meaningful involvement in minority constituencies in the identification, preservation, and interpretation of historic resources. We hope to encourage projects that promote underrepresented histories, including Black history, civil rights history, women's history, disability history, Indigenous history, Latinx history, LGBTQ plus history, and the history of any other marginalized group. Some of these projects could be capital investment or brick and mortar preservation of buildings with a connection to underrepresented groups and histories, the identification and evaluation of sites through things such as National Register nominations. It could include preservation plans, archaeological research, or architectural surveys, and also could include things like updates to the interpretation of sites that include marginalized histories, such as exhibits and programming. If you'd like to learn more about our special initiatives, you can find the fact sheet on our website as well as in the application itself. And for any project-specific related questions to the initiatives themselves, please reach out to a program officer after the presentation and we'll be happy to answer them. So, we're officially in our 7th year of using the online application format, which means that for many of you who've applied to us relatively recently, this information will sound pretty familiar. First and foremost, we encourage you to start the application process as early as possible. This will allow you plenty of time to acquire all of the necessary information and also contact us if you have any questions. You'll want to make an account on FormSite for your application so that you can save and return to it at your convenience. Staff at the Trust doesn't have access to any usernames or passwords you create, so please make sure to keep that information saved for your own records. If you don't save that information and you lose it, you'll have to contact FormSite to help you retrieve it, which unfortunately isn't something we at the Trust can help you with. So to avoid all of that, we just recommend you keep that information somewhere safe. Every applicant will need to make a brand new FormSite account, including returning applicants. So if you set up an account last year, you cannot use it again. A new one needs to be created. You'll need to have one account per application type. Again, application types include capital, HSM, heritage tourism, and MCRP. So, for example, if you're submitting two HSM applications, you'll only need one account because both applications fall under the HSM type. On the other hand, if you're submitting one HSM application and one capital application, you will need two separate accounts because they are different application types. Before filling out your application, you should first read through the PDF or Word version of the application so that you have an understanding of the different sections and the information needed for each of them. This is helpful because you'll be able to see the application in its entirety instead of question by question, which is how FormSite will present it to you. Everyone has their own ways of filling out the application, but we find that the best way is to type all of your answers into a Word document offline and copy and paste it into the online application. This is really helpful because it's easier to format your answers better this way, and it also gives you a backup location where all your information is safe in case something happens to go wrong, like your internet crashes in the middle of you filling out the application and the section you're working on isn't saved. So you'll just want to pay attention to the word count and make sure that what you write in your Word document correlates with the allowable word count listed for the question in FormSite because it will cut you off at a certain word count. You'll also want to make sure that you familiarize yourself with the attachments checklist for the grant type that you're applying for. Different application types have different attachment checklists. So please make sure to pay attention to that. Make sure to review this at the start of the application process because certain things like the governing body board resolutions and assurances may take longer to obtain than other things. With that being said, make sure to check your board meeting schedules now so that you can plan accordingly. All links to the online PDF and Word versions of the application are all available on our website under the Resources tab on our homepage. So, who's eligible for our grants? Well, all applicants must fall under one of the following categories: agencies or entities of county government, agencies or entities of municipal government, agencies or entities of state government, or nonprofit 501c organization that's compliant with the New Jersey charitable registration laws. Nonprofit applicants should submit their New Jersey charitable registration number, which will check for compliance. We also have ownership requirements, which can differ slightly depending on the grant type. For our HSM grants, if the applicant doesn't own the resource outright, you'll need to provide us with a signed owner approval form that shows us that the owner of the building knows you're applying for the grant and is aware of the project scope. For our heritage tourism grants, there are no ownership or lease requirements, but if the applicant isn't the owner, we will need, again, a signed owner approval form similar to HSM. For municipal, county, and regional planning grants, there are also no ownership or lease requirements, but we do require a municipal consent form from each municipality within the boundaries of the proposed project. So this requires the signature of the chief elected officer or official of each municipality in which the project area is located. For capital grants, if the applicant doesn't own the property outright or in fee simple, they'll need to show that they have a long-term lease with a minimum of 15 years remaining at the time of application submittal. If you don't have a long-term lease, you can pursue a signed joint signatory consent form. This option does come with the caveat that the owner of the property must be an eligible applicant in their own right and will also have to act as a co-signer on the grant agreement. Most applicants choose to provide the lease if they can because it's more straightforward. Additionally, a signed owner approval form will also need to be provided if the applicant isn't the owner of the property. And we'll be going over this in further detail for each grant type later on in the presentation. We do have requirements for the type of properties that qualify for our grants, and these include properties that are individually listed in the New Jersey Register of Historic Places or the National Register of Historic Places, or contributing resources in a historic district that is listed in the New Jersey or National Register of Historic Places. If the property is a contributing resource to a listed historic district, you will need to provide documentation either in the form of the nomination itself or a letter from the State Historic Preservation Office stating that it's in fact a contributed resource to the district. Lastly, if your property isn't yet listed, it needs to be listed or certified eligible for listing on the New Jersey or National Register by the State Historic Preservation Office by August 1st, 2025. For our capital grants, your resource will need to be listed in order to be awarded a grant. If your resources isn't listed at the time you submit your application, you will need to submit proof that it'll be listed by August 1st. This could be in the form of the date or agenda for the state review board showing that your property is calendared. I do also want to add that we cannot fund properties that are active houses of worship. So eligible activities vary depending on the specific grant type. So this list you see in front of you broken down by grant type is by no means a comprehensive list. It's just some examples of the types of projects we see the most often. We have things like preservation plans and archaeological surveys under our historic site management grants, preparation of local historic preservation ordinances under our municipal, county, and regional planning grants, interpretive planning under our heritage tourism grants, and preservation, restoration, rehabilitation, archaeological surveys, and reconstruction work under our capital grants. My colleagues will be going into greater detail about eligible activities for each specific grant type later on in the presentation, and you can find a more comprehensive list in our grant guidelines or our website. If you have any questions or concerns about whether or not your particular project would be eligible, you can give us a call at the Trust and we'd be happy to discuss it with you. And again, just a reminder, please make sure that when you're filling out your application, you've chosen the correct application type for your project. While there are some different requirements and criteria depending on the grant type you're applying for, there are some criteria that are consistent across them all. The first being the significance of the resource. We look to see what its listing status is, whether it's on the New Jersey Register of Historic Places, National Register of Historic Places, or a National Historic Landmark. We also want to know if the resource is under threat of collapse, demolition, inappropriate use, or development. And the next criteria we look at is the project concept and team. This is where we ask questions like, is the work clear, thorough, and appropriate for the resource? Is the project team qualified? Is the proposed budget realistic? And is the schedule feasible? The third category is organizational ability. This is where we want to know the organization itself, its long-term commitment to the preservation of the resource, and fundraising ability. We also want to know if the matching funds are available, and if not, how you will come up with that. These questions help us determine whether the applicant organization are good stewards of the resource and if they can manage grants effectively. And the final category is public benefit, where we want to see how the project involves and supports the local community. Some questions we ask here are, does the project represent innovative design, programming, or reach new audiences? Does the project complement other state initiatives? Is there community support? Will funding make a difference in the quality of the project? I would also like to add that Community support is extremely important and is something that our evaluators really like to see. So we recommend that applicants reach out to their legislatures, your local government officials, other nonprofits, or any other community members to obtain letters of support for the project. You'll want to make sure to include these in your application. And lastly, I just want to touch upon what grant types we'll be offering in 2025, the minimum and maximum award for each type, and the matching requirement for each type. This is just a basic overview, and it'll be talked about in further detail later on in the presentation. So if you have questions, it might be best to wait until we get to that section on that individual grant type, as it'll most likely be answered then. So our historic site management, heritage tourism, and municipal, county, and regional planning grants all have the same bracket of grant requests and match. The minimum request amount is $5,000 and the maximum is $75,000. And the trust will provide up to 75% of the grant funded project. For our capital level 1 grants, there's a minimum request of $5,000 and a maximum of $150,000. And the trust will provide up to 60% of the grant funded project. Our capital level 2 grants have a minimum request of $150,001 and a maximum of $750,000, and the trust will provide up to 50% of the grant-funded project. And lastly, our Capital 3 multi-phase grants have a minimum request of $500,000 and a maximum of $750,000 per phase, and there must be at least 2 phases, and the trust will provide up to 50% of the grant-funded project. And that is it for me. And before I pass this along, do we have any questions?
We do have a couple questions. Lysel asks, what is the total money that will be awarded for this year?
I'll take this. We don't have an exact amount known at this point. We advertised for 10 million, so we're anticipating at least 10 million. I don't anticipate a lot more than that like we have in past years. So again, moving forward, I guess keeping 10 million in mind that's the amount that we should be handing out.
Okay, so our next question is, did the 2024 grant recipient awards pass the legislature?
Yes, it passed the legislature back in December, near the end of December, and the governor signed that legislation today, literally less than an hour ago. So we expect a similar type of schedule for this coming grant round where things pass in December, and either sometime in December, possibly January is when the governor signs it.
Okay. Amy asks, we are a house of worship. Where do I look on the website for the compliance part of the ruling?
We have links to both of the rulings on our frequently asked questions section. When you look up through under the dealing with our application process in this grant round, so there's a section dealing with frequently asked questions. You'll find both links there.
Okay. And then if we could just get a little more clarification on the active houses of worships, are they or are they not eligible for grants? There's a little confusion between Glenn's portion and Stephanie's.
Yeah, and we don't know. What I've been told is that the law hasn't changed. That the New Jersey Constitution says that you can't fund houses of worship. However, this latest ruling seems to have a slightly different opinion regarding that. Again, that's U.S. District Court versus New Jersey State Court. So again, if you are active house of worship and you want to apply, you read through the rulings and you feel that that you do comply with the law. Once we receive the application, we'll have to actually submit that to our Deputy Attorney General's office for their review, and they will make a determination on whether it's compliant with the law or not. If it's not, in their opinion, then the application won't be moving forward. If it is, then it'll be put in with the rest of the other applications that are eligible. So there's no, and it's not something that we can answer. If you show, oh, we're going to be doing this, we can't answer that. The applications and all that have to go to the Attorney General's office for their review and opinion. So unfortunately, there is no right or wrong answer to that. It's going to depend on your specific project.
Okay. Let's see. Kevin asked, do I understand correctly that we can apply for a grant and apply for state historic registry status within the same year, i.e. we don't have to be registered this year and apply for funding next year?
Actually, the question was taken away before I could digest it all. You are, HSM grant or municipal, county, and regional planning grant, both you could be used to apply to get your site listed on the New Jersey and or National Register. So you can get a grant to do that. And I don't know if the second part of that question was in order to, once it gets listed, to come back for a future capital grant. Again, I'm sorry, I don't have the rest of the question in front of me now.
Okay, we do have another question here. Will funding be endangered at all by the current administration?
All of the trust funding comes from New Jersey corporate business tax, so it's a state tax. It's a dedicated tax, dedicated fund through the Constitution. No, it's all state money. So federal involvement does not impact our grants.
We do have another question regarding heritage tourism. I'm going to hold off on that one until we make it through Ashley's portion of the heritage tourism on the PowerPoint. Other than that, we have no more questions.
Well, in that case, hi everyone. I'm Alexis Alamy, and I'm a program officer here at the Trust, as well as the Trust staff archaeologist. I'm going to briefly review the archaeological requirements of trust-funded projects, which are in place to comply with laws and regulations that protect archaeological resources. And these include the Secretary of the Interior's standards and guidelines for historic preservation, as well as with the New Jersey Register of Historic Places Act. The archaeological requirements associated with your prospective project will vary according to a number of variables. So we encourage you to get in touch with our office to discuss your projects in more detail and to receive guidance more specific to your project. Right now, this is meant to be a broad overview for planning purposes as you prepare your application. But that said, you should note that archaeological investigations are eligible activities for both planning and capital grant applications. And before we dive in, I'd like to just point out that we have a number of fact sheets available on the Trust website, which are related to a variety of topics, including archaeology. These are a useful reference outlining some of the requirements for completing archaeological surveys in accordance with the laws, regulations, and standards that are associated with trust finding. You can find these fact sheets and more at the web address shown on the slide. They'll be under the heading Guidelines and Fact Sheets. And new this year is a fact sheet offering guidelines for the preparation of archaeological monitoring protocols. Consistent with guidance from the Historic Preservation Office, the advanced preparation of archaeological monitoring protocols is required for projects where archaeological monitoring has been approved. And we'll get into archaeological monitoring and phased excavation a little more in the next slide. But I want you to know overall that we're always happy to meet with you to discuss your projects in more detail and to answer any questions you may have. So don't hesitate to reach out for more project-specific guidance at any time, and you'll find all of our contact information at the end of this presentation. So I thought we'd start with some potential archaeological approaches. The Trust recommends that property owners and managers consider a phased, proactive approach to archaeological investigations, regardless of whether they're required for a particular project. Archaeology is a valuable component of responsible site management that should be planned for and executed well in advance of ground disturbing taking place. Long-term, the most efficient and cost-effective means of incorporating archaeology into the preservation strategy of a site is through the initial implementation of a broad site survey, which should narrow and focus as needed. And this can be achieved through the completion of an initial phase 1 survey or preparation of an archaeological management plan. Surveys like this will result in reports describing investigative findings, a site sensitivity model, and site management recommendations. And from here, more targeted evaluations can be completed as needed. By starting with a broad survey, you can avoid potentially having to undertake multitudes of highly targeted, smaller scale investigations, which can become financially burdensome and complicated. Additionally, a complete phase 1 survey or archaeological management plan will be invaluable to you as you plan future ground disturbing activities because they will help you to understand the costs, timing, and methods that should be taken into consideration and planned for. An archaeological management plan is recommended for sites that have never been investigated archaeologically, or those that have been subjected to a lot of previous survey, or for sites that are expected to be subjected to broad-scale site improvements now or in the future. So like a preservation plan, an archaeological management plan could offer guidance for overall preservation efforts, address specific archaeological needs, and help to guide future development on site. So this will entail a comprehensive survey of the site, including a summary of all previous archaeological work, and will result in a determination of site sensitivity and potential next steps. So often archaeological management plans incorporate a similar level of effort as a phase 1 survey. Archaeological activities may also include, but are not limited to, reconnaissance level survey, known as a phase 1A, identification level field testing, known as a phase 1B, and these are sometimes combined into just a formal phase 1 investigation, an evaluation level survey, known as a phase 2, full data recovery, known as a phase 3, or archaeological monitoring during construction. The choice of action may depend in part on the nature of the proposed ground disturbing activity and its potential to disturb significant sites and/or artifacts. And each level of survey involves historic research and varying levels of excavation. I want to note here that archaeological monitoring is not the same thing as phased survey. Archaeological monitoring is the observation of ground disturbance by a qualified professional archaeologist during construction, where phased survey occurs in advance of construction. So keep in mind also that the decision to use monitoring as an approach must be made in collaboration with a qualified professional archaeologist and must be accompanied by a monitoring protocol submitted to the trust for review before proceeding. All phases of investigation require the advanced submission of a proposal and of a work plan from a qualified professional archaeologist to the trust for review. And keep in mind that additional archaeological survey could become a condition of a grant-funded project depending on the results of an initial investigation. So performing an initial phase of research may yield the conclusion that additional survey is needed, which is why it's important that archaeology is addressed early. So just as an example, we had a project a few years back where the grantee ensured that a phase 1 archaeological survey was completed, which was great, but they then neglected to read the final report, which included recommendations for additional survey. So they began construction assuming that monitoring was acceptable, but because additional survey was required, construction had to be halted and additional investigation had to occur. So as you can imagine, the time and budgetary setback incurred due to this oversight was sizable and avoidable. So let this just be a cautionary tale to plan early and well for archaeology. And if you're unsure about how to select an archaeologist or which level of investigation is most appropriate for your project, please, again, don't hesitate to reach out to us. We're happy to work with you as you plan for your project's needs. And apart from the incorporation of archaeology into the preservation strategy of your site and for planning purposes, there are situations where the consideration of archaeological resources is a requirement of trust funding. So as a general rule, even if the primary goal of your project is not an archaeological investigation, you're required to consider archaeology if you have any ground disturbing activities planned. And I won't read this full list, but some examples of the kinds of activities that have required archaeological consideration in past trust projects include the excavation of trenches for utility service and site drainage, excavation related to ADA site improvements, and the construction or expansion of walkways, driveways, and parking areas. And just to clarify, consideration does not necessarily mean excavation or even formal investigation. Consideration should start with an assessment of whether ground disturbance is included in the project, the nature of that ground disturbance, and whether the proposed project area has been disturbed previously. So not all disturbance will have removed all archaeological potential, which is why it's important to really consider what's being proposed in a meaningful way. You'll be asked about this in the application, so please be prepared to dig into your site's history a little bit to determine what ground disturbing work has been completed in the past and where, as well as what your plans are for the future. And work with your consultants on this. Having open and thorough conversations early on with everyone involved in your project is sound project management. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with the phrase measure twice, cut once, and I like to think of this as being part of the same philosophy. You just want to plan thoroughly and execute once. And additionally, we know that many historic site management or planning grants involve activities that lay the groundwork for future capital endeavors. So to that end, I wanted to offer some friendly reminders that you may be required to address archaeology in some of your work products. This includes within preservation plans, construction drawings and specifications, planning documents that outline future ground disturbing activities, and a variety of other documents. Not everything is listed here. The extent to which archaeology will need to be addressed may vary on a site-by-site and project-specific basis. So just remember to keep in touch with the trust to make sure that requirements, if any, are being met and planned for. But generally speaking, you'll be required to address the archaeological needs or potential of your site in some way in your planning documents. So you'll want to plan for that. A good rule of thumb is that if there's ground disturbance planned for the current project or for future projects, you should consider how you might address the known or potential archaeological resources that could be affected by it, as you'll be required to if the project is funded. Archaeology must be taken into consideration prior to engaging in ground disturbing activities, and archaeological investigation, if required, must therefore be planned and budgeted for well in advance. And we strongly recommend that you consider the potential archaeological resources on your site as early as possible in order to best plan for the long-term stewardship of the site. So what is required? So in order to determine the level of archaeological consideration involved in your project, we recommend that you first consider whether there is any ground disturbance involved. Unless the project area has been determined not to be archaeologically sensitive through previous survey or documented disturbance, you'll likely be required to submit a work proposal for archaeology to the trust for approval prior to moving forward with ground disturbing activities if the project is funded. Because of this, we strongly recommend that you either give us a call for guidance or consult with a professional archaeologist as you're putting together your application, and certainly before you begin any ground disturbing activity if the project is funded. Ensuring that adequate time and funding have been included to allow archaeological investigations to be conducted to professional standards will ultimately strengthen your application. And to give you an idea of the timing of things, if archaeology is a component of your project, you'll need to submit a proposal outlining the costs and timeline for completing the survey. And this may or may not be submitted at the same time as a work plan, but a work plan will also need to be submitted at some point prior to moving forward with the project. These documents are similar, but typically a proposal offers a more generalized description of the project approach, sufficient to determine whether it's appropriate, and a work plan consists of a more detailed description of what will actually be completed. With each of these documents approved, archaeology would be able to start, and it should start long before ground disturbing activity, as the investigation itself will take some time to complete, as well as processing the results and preparing the final report. The report must be submitted to the trust for review with the understanding that we may request revisions, and once a final draft of the report has been approved, we'll evaluate how the investigation's findings intersect with the proposed project to determine whether the project can proceed as planned with alterations or following additional survey. And the trust submits a final copy of these reports to the Historic Preservation Office on your behalf. And with all of that said, I want to emphasize here that if you know that archaeology is a required component of your project, your application will be strengthened by the inclusion of a proposal from a qualified professional archaeologist. And this proposal should include a scope of work, budget, and timeline. In the past, we've seen applications that include monitoring as a sort of umbrella term, or that state that archaeology will be incorporated as needed. This isn't sufficient for a competitive grant program. The evaluators are looking for accurate proposals that demonstrate a complete understanding of the project. And from a financial perspective, it benefits you to have actual costs in hand when you submit your application, because the numbers submitted in the application are going to be used to calculate the eligible grant award for the project. And just a quick note on the survey and reporting requirements associated with trust funding. Fortunately, New Jersey regulations provide a set of guidelines for completing surveys, which are outlined in New Jersey Administrative Code. The Historic Preservation Office also maintains guidelines for preparing cultural resource management reports, which are consistent with both the Secretary of the Interior standards as well as with the New Jersey Register Act rules. Direct links to each of these documents can be accessed through the fact sheets on the website, and I'm happy to provide them at any point. There are also live links embedded in this presentation, which you'll be able to access through the PDF version when that becomes available. All phases of archaeological survey are required to be in keeping with these guidelines and regulations, appropriate to the level of investigation that's being undertaken. Additionally, work must be completed by individuals meeting or exceeding the professional qualification standards for archaeology outlined by the Secretary of the Interior. So what if ground disturbance isn't a part of your project at all? You're still required to consider the archaeological potential of your site in planning documents and in your application. We want to understand how known or potential archaeological resources on your site have been incorporated into your preservation strategy and what your plans would be for addressing any archaeological concerns that may arise in the future or during the course of your proposed project. This might be as simple as stating that if any ground disturbance is to occur, a professional archaeologist will be consulted prior to excavation in your planning documents, and as comprehensive as enlisting an archaeologist to prepare a section for a preservation plan or to complete a formal survey for the site. It will ultimately depend on the project's goals. But as you consider how you might incorporate archaeology into your projects and at what point, it may be beneficial to consider whether any of your goals may eventually require ground disturbing activity. So, for example, you might foresee wanting to make improvements to the foundations of one of the buildings on your site, or to eventually add visitor amenities such as a bathroom. These activities are just two examples of future projects that may eventually require the consideration of archaeology. And with a plan in place well in advance of following through with them, you could save time and money down the road. You may also have research questions that can only be answered by archaeology or that will further enrich the knowledge you have about the history of your site and its occupants. This is another consideration for the future. We've seen a number of grantees incorporate a public archaeology component into their projects as well, which has resulted in increased visitation to and interest in their sites. And on that note, I want to take a moment to remind you that you might consider working with your archaeological team to identify whether undertaking a program of public archaeology is a good fit for this project. So taking the opportunity to share the archaeology on your property with the people who visit and love it can be a great way to increase public engagement at your site. And as I said earlier, we've seen a number of successful public archaeology projects here at the Trust. So it's been done and could be again. Depending on the scope of the archaeological investigation you'll be undertaking, archaeology can be used as a training opportunity as well, which could allow for collaboration with local professional archaeologists and universities to build mutually beneficial partnerships. And of course, whether public archaeology becomes a component of your proposed project or not, undertaking an archaeological investigation could provide new insight into your site's history and add to your understanding of its use and development over time. Are there any questions specific to archaeology before we move on?
We don't at this time. If anybody has any that come up in their mind later down the road, we will answer them during the Q&A portion.
Great. Well, next you'll learn more about HSM grants from my colleague Shannon.
All right, thank you, Alexis. Hi, everybody. I'm Shannon Bremer, and I'm going to be discussing our Historic Site Management, or HSM, applications. Although they are separate application types, our HSM, municipal, county, and regional planning, and heritage tourism applications share many similar components. So if you are planning to apply for any of the grants I just listed, I do recommend that you pay close attention to the information that I'll be detailing in this portion of the workshop. Later on, my colleague Olivia will explain the sections of the applications that are different for our MCRP application before passing things along to our colleague Ashley, who will discuss our heritage tourism applications. And this is just a reminder to everyone that each application type has its own application with different program-specific questions, so please make sure you select the correct application type when you're getting ready to apply. Eligible activities for our HSM grants include construction documents and non-construction activities related to planning for preservation or rehabilitation of a historic property. This includes things such as preservation plans and historic structure reports, feasibility studies, structural evaluations, archaeological studies, and historic landscape plans. Other fundable activities can include preparation of nominations for the New Jersey Register or National Register, organizational strategic plans, and HABS, HARE, or HALS documentation. Additional activities eligible for funding can be found in the grant guidelines. If you don't see a project type listed that you think might be eligible, please contact a program officer and they'll be able to guide you. Our HSM grants provide a 3-to-1 funding match. This means that the trust provides up to 75% of the total project costs, and the applicant provides 25% of the total project cost. So for example, if your total project cost is $60,000, your grant request would be for $45,000, meaning that your required match would be for $15,000. If you do not need to have your full match in hand, you do not need to have your full match in hand at the time of application. However, all applicants should demonstrate the ability to provide the full match required to complete the project. So if you don't have your full match in hand, you should include details about your fundraising plan, such as any planned fundraising events or potential funding sources like local, county, or federal grants. There are a few requirements that you should be aware of before applying for our HSM grant. The first of these requirements is that the owner approval is required if the applicant does not own the property. There's only one exception to this, and that's if the project you're applying for is a historic district nomination. In that case, the owner approval form would only need to be signed by the chief elected official of each municipality that falls within the boundaries of the proposed project area, not the individual owner of each property within the boundary of the proposed district. The next requirement is that your resource must be listed or certified eligible for listing on the New Jersey or National Registers of Historic Places by August 1st. If you plan on pursuing capital funds from us in the future, please note that this is required and you should be listed on the state or national register before applying in order to receive any funding. All work must be completed within 2 years after grant funds are appropriated. And we also require that all grantees acknowledge the funding assistance in all published materials. So next we'll go through each part of the HSM application. Again, much of the application is the same as last year, apart from the addition of one new section, which is the archaeology section. Our revised application is divided into 10 sections: eligibility statements, applicant information, property ownership, resource information and historic significance, climate change, project concept and team, archaeology, project budget, organizational ability, and public access and benefit. Our sections that focus on our evaluation criteria are the resource information and historic significance, project concept and team, project budget, organizational ability, and public access and benefit. While the whole application should be prepared by someone who really knows your project and organization, it is very important for the sections that match our evaluation criteria. One thing I would like to note is that we have adjusted and changed some of our word counts in the application, so please be aware of your word counts as you fill out each question. If you go over the word limit, FormSite will only accept the words up to the limit and will remove any words after it, so we won't see them. The first section of the grant is pretty straightforward. That's our eligibility statements, and this establishes whether your organization and resource are eligible for our grant funding. The next section is the applicant information. This is where you will list your organization information, including your primary contact for the project. This is the person that our program officers will be reaching out to in order to arrange an application site visit. The contact listed should be very familiar with the project and able to answer any questions about project details that the staff may have upon their application site visit. If you are one of the fortunate people to receive a grant, this is also the contact that the trust will go through in the future, so please make sure whoever you want that future information to go to is the person that you list. If you're a nonprofit, you'll need to provide your IRS 501c determination letter, as well as your New Jersey charitable registration number. All applicants must submit a governing body or board resolution and assurances form. This designates the person who will sign application documents, as well as certifies the matching funds. We do provide a sample in our application. However, municipalities and local governments are allowed to use their own resolution form. The purpose of this document is to authorize the application as well as the exact amount of the grant request and the matching funds to be provided. So if you are using a municipal or government resolution form, make sure that that information does get included. Our property ownership section confirms whether the applicant owns the property or properties. An owner approval form is only required when you, the applicant, do not own the subject property of the application. As I mentioned before, if your application is for a historic district nomination, the owner approval form would only need to be signed by the chief elected official of each municipality that falls within the boundaries of the proposed project area, not the individual owner of each property within the boundary of the proposed district. So next up is our resource information and historic significance. This is where you will tell us about your resource. We ask that you use the historic name for the property as it's listed by the New Jersey Historic Preservation Office. To determine what name to use, you can check out the section labeled Identify on their website. If your project includes more than one property, you will have to choose one as your reference property. You'll be able to list all the properties in a separate question. We will also ask for you for the physical property address as well as a Google Maps link, as this is what we use to locate the property when we come for our site visit. Next, we ask for the historic register status of the resource, including whether it's listed individually or as contributing to a district. If your property is not already listed on the National or New Jersey Register, please remember that it needs to be certified eligible by the State Historic Preservation Office by August 1st. This is a hard deadline, and we will not accept certificates of eligibility after August 1st. If you do not currently have a certificate of eligibility for your site, we do recommend that you start the process immediately in order to meet that August 1st deadline. If you're unsure if you have a certificate of eligibility already, or you have any questions about the process, please reach out to the Historic Preservation Office. The Historic Preservation Office currently has a backlog, so it's imperative that you start this process as soon as humanly possible if you need a certificate of eligibility. Next, we ask you to look at your New Jersey Register, National Register, or Certificate of Eligibility and identify which criteria of significance your resource or district meets. We also ask you to briefly explain the significance as it pertains to or is not covered by the criteria. This year, we also added a general historic significance question where you'll have the opportunity to briefly explain the significance of your resource and tell us why it's important to preserve. In this section of the application, we're also going to ask you about the historic and current uses of the property, as well as any future plans you may have. You also have the opportunity to explain how the property has evolved to meet the changing needs of the resource. Ownership and applicant history is where we want to know when and how you acquired the property, either through ownership or lease. And we also want to know if your property is endangered, meaning are there any threats to the resource? This could be anything from past neglect and poor stewardship to structural concerns and threat of demolition or development. So whether you believe in climate change or not, it's no secret that there are extreme weather events happening across New Jersey that have the potential to affect your historic resource. As a result, we've expanded our application questions to help both applicants and us understand the hazards that may affect your resource in this new age. We ask questions about how you're planning for climate change, such as if you're creating a mitigation plan or if you're planning any site changes to promote better drainage. We also ask you to look at the risk index map to identify the hazards that may impact your site. And just so everyone can breathe a little bit easier, no, your historic site is not likely to be impacted by a volcanic event. In addition, we provide resources that help you identify if your property is in a flood zone, as well as a follow-up question about if your property has flood insurance. For our MCRP application, we want to know if your community participates in the National Flood Insurance Program. In addition, we ask if you or anyone in your organization is staying up to date on the happenings in the climate change world by attending different climate change events. Since we know many will want more information, we do include links within the application to take you to reputable sites, and we also created a resource guide that follows along with the climate change application questions that will be posted on our website under the resource tab. As always, if you have any questions or concerns about this section in particular, please contact our staff. Next up is the project concept and team section. You'll be able to select all of the activities included in the project, as well as provide us with a project summary and how the project will be innovative or exemplary. We ask for the current status of the project, including whether you've selected a consultant or if you're preparing a request for proposals. If you have selected your consultants, please make sure you submit their resume and credentials, as well as their proposal for completing the scope of work. If you are preparing an RFP, you will need to include a description of the qualifications you're looking for in a consultant. You do not have to submit a completed or final RFP. Draft RFPs are completely acceptable. And finally, you will also need to include professionally prepared cost estimates. This year, we've included a section specific to archaeology. Here, we hope to get a sense of how archaeology has been incorporated into the preservation strategy of your site. We ask for information regarding previous archaeological investigations that have occurred on site, if any, as well as whether projects involving ground disturbance are currently planned or are being considered. This is all aimed at allowing us to understand how known or potential archaeological resources are being incorporated within either your current project plans or your long-term plans for the site. Not all projects will require the inclusion of an archaeological investigation. If yours does not, due to a lack of proposed ground disturbance altogether, the preparation of a planning document that does not require a formal investigation and scope, or the results of previous archaeological survey, to name a few examples, please be sure to describe this within this section of the application. This is also a great place to let us know if you haven't yet had a need for formally considering the archaeological resources that may lie within your site, if that's the case. In the project budget section, you will give us a detailed list of work products and their associated costs. You will also identify the total project cost, the amount of your grant request, as well as the match required to complete your project. We also ask how much of your match you have in hand and the remaining match needed. Examples of eligible matches include monies fundraised by the organization, county grants, federal grants, and municipal budgets, to name a few. The only ineligible match for our grants are other corporate business tax funding. There is no match expended for our HSM grants, meaning any work completed prior to the application deadline of April 24th, 2025 is not eligible. If you choose to move forward with your project after the application deadline, you can. However, please remember that there are no guarantees that you'll be awarded a grant. So if you do choose to move forward, you should keep the program officer assigned to your application in the loop to ensure that you're following all of our program requirements. If you are a nonprofit, you should submit account statements or funding commitments as proof of your available funds. This should be submitted with attachment F, organizational ability. If you are a county or municipal entity, the governing body / board resolution and assurances committing the specific matching funds will serve as your documentation. In organizational ability, we are looking for information about your organization, such as its size and mission statement. We want to know if you have a cyclical or long-term maintenance plan for your property, who's responsible for routine maintenance, and if you have a maintenance fund, or if there are any planning documents that support those decisions. We also want to know what experience your organization has with managing grants and working with consultants. You will need to identify who from your organization will be managing this grant and providing project oversight. This also includes identifying any and all prior grants that person managed, as well as if the applicant organization has experience working with consultants or contractors. You also have an opportunity to show any preservation-related continuing education and professional development activities that have been attended by your staff, board, volunteers, or project team in the past 2 years. If you have any open grants with the trust, you'll be asked to identify them and when they are projected to end. If applicable, please explain how you plan to raise the remaining matching funds for the project or any additional preservation efforts. As mentioned before, this is where you'll attach your operating budget and balance sheet if you're a nonprofit. The final section of the application is public access and benefit. This is where you will talk about how your resource is interpreted to the public, how it currently assesses the needs of the community, as well as how it plans to do so in the future. We want to know if you are open to the public on a regular basis and what your current operating hours are. If you collect visitation numbers, you can share those with us too. This section is also where we'll ask you about our special initiatives and also about state and federal heritage initiatives. There are links to all of the listed initiatives, including certified local governments, listing on our Journey Through Jersey site, Main Street Communities, and New Jersey Women's Heritage Trail, to name a few. If you participate in any of the listed initiatives, please make sure that you check the box for it in the application section. If you do not include it in the application, the evaluators may not know that you participate in these initiatives. And before I turn it over to Olivia, I do see we have a couple of questions.
We do. I'm going to start here with Kevin. To be certified eligible for the state registry by August 1st, how early should an application be started?
So like I mentioned before, you definitely want to start this as pretty much soon as humanly possible. You can find all of the information on how to get a certificate of eligibility on HPO's website. And if you have any questions about that process, how that works, what you need to actually fill out an application, we do recommend that you reach out to the Historic Preservation Office so that they can guide you through that process.
Okay, so the next question. Can time volunteered by qualified local people, as in members of the historical societies and HPCs especially, be counted as part of matching funds? Does it depend on the professional qualifications of the volunteers?
I'll jump in on that one.
Yeah.
Since this is a reimbursement grant program, you actually need invoices and proof of payment. So volunteer hours and time cannot be counted towards your match. And actually, if I may just kind of go back to your talk about the eligibility, the COE, the certificate of eligibility and stuff like that. I think we have some people joining us today who are first-time people and may not be familiar with the whole process of being listed on the New Jersey or National Register, the difference between that and actually having a certificate of eligibility, which means that you're eligibly listed, but you haven't gone through the process of getting it listed. So for all of our HSM planning grants, you need at least a certificate of eligibility. And again, as Shannon mentioned, they being the Historic Preservation Office recommend at least 45 days in advance to give them the application. Some of this stuff was already certified eligible. So going to their website to see, there's also a tool, Lucy GIS, which lists all the on GIS mapping, everything that's listed as far as districts, individual listings. So there are resources out there from the Historic Preservation Office that could help you determine if you don't know whether you're listed or determined eligible yet. So that'd be a first stop to see if there's documentation. But yes, reaching out to them sooner rather than later to get that certificate if you're not listed already from them to say that you are eligible for the National Register or State Register is important. I know we had a number of questions that dealt with that. So.
Okay, so for the next question, does the contact person for a project owned by a municipality need to be an employee of that municipality?
Nope. Many times we've actually had the consultant who's actually, leading the project or completing the project as the contact person because the municipality has designated them to be that person. So it's really anyone that the municipality feels will be the best person to contact and meet with our program officers for the site visit.
Okay, so for the next question, it says for the HSM grants, I understood that they can be used to apply for National State Historic Registry, but then later on it was stated that you need to be eligible for the next year. So can you please clarify those statements?
Yeah, absolutely. So you are correct that you can use our HSM grants to apply for National and State Historic Register. What we do require is that you receive a certificate of eligibility from the State Historic Preservation Office by August 1st. So what that basically means is that there's a document, as Glenn was kind of saying, that HPO has that says that you are eligible to be listed on the National or State Register. And that document is something that is what you need to receive from HPO. I hope that helped clarify that.
Okay, so next question, where do we go to start the process of getting certified eligible for the State Historic Register?
Yep, so you're going to visit HPO's website. On their website, I'm not sure what section of it, but you can go there
Identify.
and they have, thank you.
It's called Identify, yeah. And
I
for those who
couldn't
don't
remember
know,
if it's under Identify.
Yeah. And for those who don't know, HPO stands for Historic Preservation Office. So it's a state office that pertains to listing of New Jersey and National Register properties. It's located within the Department of Environmental Protection, DEP.
Yep. Yeah, so all the information about the application, contact information, their email, their phone number, you can find on their website. If you just Google Historic Preservation Office, New Jersey, it should be one of the first links that pop up.
Okay, we have no open questions at this time.
Great. And I'm going to pass it off to Olivia to talk about our MCRP grants.
Thanks, Shannon. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Olivia Chaudhary, and I will be giving an overview of the Municipal, County, and Regional Planning, or MCRP grants. The MCRP application is separate from the Historic Site Management, Heritage Tourism, and Capital Grant applications, so be sure you're filling out the correct one. There are 4 major eligible activities for the MCRP grants. They include preparation of design guidelines, preparation or revision of historic preservation ordinances, preparation of historic preservation components to a municipal, county, or master plan, and the preparation of an architectural survey to identify historic properties using the State Historic Preservation Office's approved guidelines and format. If you are applying for one of these 4 activities, be sure to complete the MCRP application and not the HSM application. If you are proposing a planning document or activity other than what we've mentioned here, please out to Judith Murphy or any of our other team members to determine if it is an eligible activity. The MCRP application is quite similar to the HSM applications, but with some key differences. This slide shows all components of the application. The sections in black, which are applicant information, climate change, project budget, and archaeology, are similar to the HSM application. The sections in red have some key differences and will be discussed shortly. The MCRP applications will be evaluated for resource information and historic significance, project concept and team, project budget, organizational ability, and public access and benefit, which I will also discuss in more detail. Here are the major differences between the HSM and MCRP applications. For property ownership, MCRP grants do not need to demonstrate ownership of the project area, but the municipal consent form requires the signature of the chief elected official of each municipality in which the project area is located. For the resource information and historic significance, the project area must contain at least one resource that is listed or certified eligible for listing in the New Jersey State or National Register of Historic Places. The resource must be either individually listed or as a contributing resource in a historic district. In this section, you must identify previous and current preservation planning efforts of the community, as well as any existing preservation planning documents, including their dates of adoption. Your project concept and team must detail the local historic preservation commission, if one exists, in addition to information on the proposed consultants for the project. Under organizational ability, you will identify any stakeholders groups involved with the project, such as historical societies or Main Street organizations. You must also discuss how this project promotes stewardship and maintenance of historic resources by private owners. For public access and benefit, you will detail how much community involvement and support there is for the project, if the project will increase awareness of the community's history, and how the project will increase community preparation in ongoing preservation efforts. All MCRP applications will be reviewed based on the following criteria. These review standards are similar to the criteria for HSM applications, with the exception of 3. Those 3 criteria are the degree to which the project promotes stewardship and maintenance of historic resources by private owners, and the degree to which the project fosters the goals of the New Jersey Comprehensive Statewide Historic Preservation Plan, which runs between 2023 and 2028. And the third is the degree to which the applicant involves the community in the preservation process. The other 2 criteria, which are organizational ability and public benefit, are shared with the HSM applications. And before we segue into heritage tourism, are there any questions?
Yes, we have one here. Who can apply for the MCRP grants, or specifically, can an agency of the state qualify?
I think the answer to that is yes, agency of the state can qualify. Frankly, I look at MCRP more as a project type than who can or can't apply. Since we're dealing with survey work, stuff that usually agencies of government deal with, survey work, design guidelines, that sort of thing. So yes, unless someone wants to correct me, I believe yes.
Okay, that is the only question we had, so we're good to move on.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Ashley Parker, and I am the Heritage Tourism Coordinator here at the Trust. And I'm going to discuss with you the Heritage Tourism application. The Heritage Tourism application, once again, is very similar to the Historic Site Management application, except for the sections that are highlighted in red. So this section will cover the differences and requirements for heritage tourism. So first up, we have eligible activities. So these are some of the activities that we consider to be heritage tourism, which can be visitor readiness assessments, visitor evaluations, and/or the development of performance evaluation measures, interpretive planning for one or multiple sites, design and fabrication or interpretive signage or literature. We're not looking to replace existing brochures, but rather the creation of new designs or fabrication, marketing plans or studies, and training and/or workshops that create, foster, or enhance linkages between sites. So this means you are hiring someone to speak with your organization or even several organizations on a specific topic designed to create linkages between sites. If there is something that you have in mind that is not listed in the grant guidelines, please contact Trust staff to determine if it is an eligible activity. So the Heritage Tourism Grant application is, once again, very similar to the Historic Site Management application. However, here we're going to identify some of the major differences. So although there are no ownership or lease requirements, if the applicant does not own the resource, they should demonstrate support for the project from the resource owners through the owner approval form, which can be submitted on attachment B on your USB drive. For the property information and historic significance section, at least one resource must be listed or certified eligible in the New Jersey or National Register of Historic Places, either individually or as a contributing resource in a historic district. If your project is for more than one property, choose a reference property that meets the property ownership and historic significant requirements. There is no climate change section to complete. Under the project concept and team, we ask that you check to make sure that the project is consistent with the New Jersey Heritage Tourism Master Plan, and if it links to a broader regional heritage tourism initiative. With respect to public access and benefit, we want to know if your site is visitor ready. So for example, do you have regular hours, bathrooms, a parking lot? If you are visitor ready, please provide documentation in attachment G. And there is a visitor readiness fact sheet available on our website under application resources for reference. So all heritage tourism applications will be reviewed based on the following criteria. These review standards are similar to the criteria for the Historic Site Management Grant application, with the exception that the proposed project seeks to enhance or benefit the visitor experience at the resource, fosters the goals and objectives of the New Jersey Heritage Tourism Master Plan, addresses the development of an exhibiting heritage tourism plan, or if it aims to create a broader regional tourism plan or initiative. The applicant builds upon the proposal and continues to foster heritage tourism, has the potential to reach new audiences, has the potential to promote other cultural and heritage activities, and create links between multiple sites. So this concludes the heritage tourism section. Later in the presentation, Tara will review what is required in the attachment section and how to set your application apart. It doesn't look like we have any questions at this time with regards to the heritage tourism application. So I'd like to turn the presentation over to Jennifer Boggs, who will now discuss capital applications.
Good afternoon, everyone. As Ashley said, my name is Jennifer, and we will now discuss the Trust Construction Preservation Grants, also known as capital grants. To note, even if you do not plan to apply for a capital grant at this time, we still encourage you to stick around during this section because your current project may lead to capital work in the future. In addition, there is a section following this section that is very informative about the attachments you need to include with your application, as well as a section on how to set your application apart in this very competitive grant round. So as you have already seen, each of our grant types have their own eligible activities. Capital is no different. For these capital grants, we can support both construction and non-construction activities. Eligible construction activities for this grant type include treatments such as preservation, restoration, rehabilitation, and reconstruction. Projects that include barrier-free access, interpretive signage, and project signs may also be eligible. And archaeology can be considered an eligible construction activity. In addition, new construction such as visitor amenities and compliance activities may also be eligible. For non-construction, it is important to note that the budget for these activities within the capital grant program is limited to 20% of the total project budget. Remember, this is a capital grant to mainly support construction activities, so the expenses must be directly related to the construction. But for non-construction, eligible expenses can include consultants' fees for planning, design, and construction administration, as well as construction documents, schematic designs, and specifications. And if you have any questions about whether or not your project includes eligible activities, please contact the trust staff. We are here to help. Now, there is a lot of important and sometimes confusing information on this slide. So I suggest you take a screenshot of it now for reference, but I will go through it as quickly and as concisely as possible. So first, the trust grants are matching grants, as discussed. So your organization is responsible for providing funding proportionate to your grant type and award. For capital grants, there are 3 different levels with differing matching requirements. To start, we have Capital 1 grants with awards between $5,000 to $150,000, and your organization is responsible for providing a 40% match. So for example, if the total project cost is $100,000, the trust can provide up to $60,000 and the match would be $40,000. For Capital 2 grants with awards between $150,001 to $750,000, your organization is responsible for providing a 50% match. For example, if your total project cost is $500,000, your grant award would be $250,000 with a match of $250,000. For Capital 3 or multi-phase grants with awards between $500,000 and $750,000, your organization is also responsible for providing a 50% match. And this match is per phase of the grant. Please note that for all these grant types, I use the terminology match to your grant award. If the project cost is greater than the grant plus your required match, your organization is still responsible for providing the remaining or actual matching funds to complete the project. The grant award cannot be increased. And to continue on matching funds, it is important to note that special state appropriations, or monies derived from the corporate business tax, are not eligible as matching funds. However, you can use federal and county grants as eligible match. And last, capital grants may be eligible for match expended, which is exclusive to this grant type. Match expended is money spent prior to this grant round that is an integral part of your capital project. But there are limitations. Money spent prior to April 24th, 2023, 2 years before the application deadline, do not qualify as match expended. So anything spent towards your capital project between April 24th, 2023 and April 24th, 2025, the application deadline, that meets SOI standards, which is a very important aspect, and gets trust approval, may be eligible for match expended. Match expended is dispersed after the grant agreement is executed and a request for funds is made. In addition, match expended can be no more than 25% of your total project costs, and the 20% non-construction costs we discussed before still applies. If you do have match expended, again, a capital grant exclusive feature, Please include the documentation in Attachment E and get in contact with trust staff now to make sure your project is in compliance with SOI standards so that you can claim this match expended. So, as with previous grant types, we do have property ownership requirements, but add in a few more provisions for capital grants. For capital projects, the property must be owned in fee simple or leased by the applicant. If the property is leased, you must have the ability to make capital improvements included in a lease, and it must be a minimum of 15 years left on the lease from the date the grant funds are appropriated. If you do not have 15 years on your lease, please include the joint signatory consent form with your attachment B alongside your lease agreement. For the project timetable, a grant agreement must be in effect within 18 months from the date of appropriation. So, since the appropriation bill was signed in January of this year, you will have until July of next year to execute your grant agreement. In addition, capital work must begin within 2 years from the date of appropriation. Also, please note that the audit requirements in the corner of this slide. Audits are required for entities receiving more than $100,000 combined from state or federal grants in a fiscal year, and audits are not reimbursable at costs. And audits must also be completed by a licensed professional outside peer-reviewed auditor or auditing firm. Other capital grant requirements are listed on this slide. All proposed work must meet the Secretary of the Interior standards for the treatment of historic properties. If it does not, you will be ineligible for reimbursement. Also, as a reminder, the Preserve New Jersey program is reimbursable, so you must spend the money prior to receiving it. And capital reimbursements are different from other grant types, as in your reimbursement will be dependent on the amount you spend at the time of the request, minus a retainage fee that is withheld from each request. The retainage fee is equivalent to approximately 5% of the grant award, and it'll be dispersed to you at the close of the project once everything is reviewed and approved by the trust. And to take a step back, the property must also be listed in the state and/or the national register at the time of the request. In addition, you must keep documentation of all your expenses in the form of invoices and canceled checks to apply for a reimbursement. In addition to receive your first reimbursement, you must also provide documentary evidence that the trust project sign is displayed on your property. The Capital Grant Manual, included on our website, can provide more information about the specifics for the project sign. Now, if the property is owned by a nonprofit and the grant award is over $50,000, then the trust does require a preservation easement for the property, with the term dependent on the grant award ranging from 15 to 30 years, as you can see on the slide. The easement or deed restriction will go into effect at the close of the grant. The easement simply requires trust consultation for capital work during the full term of the easement. And lastly, at the close of the project, the trust requires the placement of a permanent sign or a plaque, like the one pictured on the slide, for those projects awarded $50,000 or more. More information about the permanent marker can also be found in the grant manual, and discussions will take place with your program officer about the best method for your project site. So on this slide, you will see an outline of the application sections for the capital grants. While the sections are the same across the grants, the questions within the sections will differ slightly from the other applications, and we'll go through the information in a moment. In addition to the application sections, you will see the evaluation criteria to the right that our outside evaluators will use to review your applications. Please keep this information in mind as we go through each section of the capital application. Now for the application section review, the first section of the capital application is the eligibility statements to determine if this grant type and grant program are appropriate for you and your organization at this time. Again, if you have any questions about your eligibility, please contact trust staff. The next section is applicant information, which is about you and not the project. This is where you will list the point of contact for the grant. And please make sure this person is accessible and familiar with the project. Please also review the attachments checklist for specific documents to include within this section. As a part of the property ownership section of the capital application, all applicants are required to answer questions about their ownership or lease status. Remember, you must have owner approval to be able to carry out the proposed project. So please review the attachments checklist for information about what documentation to submit based on your ownership status. The next section is the resource information and historic significance section. This section is the first section that will be evaluated by our application reviewers. So within this section, please include the property name as listed in the State Historic Preservation Office documentation, or you can find it on the Lucy website. If there is more than one property, please choose one relevant property as the reference property. You will be able to list all properties in a separate question. Also include the physical property address and link to the location on Google Maps, as you saw with the other applications. Next, you will need to include the historic register status. For capital grants, please note that in order to be eligible for the trust grant program, all properties must be listed by August 1st, 2025. If your property is not yet listed in the state or National Register of Historic Places, but will be presented to the New Jersey State Review Board for Historic Sites prior to August 1st for final approval and listing, please include a letter from HPO acknowledging the status of the nomination. The State Historic Preservation Office, or SHPO, can give you a fair assessment on the progress of your nomination, which will help you make an assessment if now is the time to apply for a trust grant. The next subsection will ask information regarding the historic significance of the resource, including the information included in the nomination, as well as information that may not be covered by the nomination, such as underrepresented histories. An additional question asks about the property's use in the past, in the present, and your future plans for the property. We also ask how the property has evolved over time to meet its changing needs. Other questions within this section include ownership and applicant history, as well as questions to evaluate the current needs of the property in terms of its general conditions and possible threats to determine the preservation needs. There is even a new question to describe the general context of the resource. And the next section, jumping off possible threats, is a section on climate change. We want to know how you are planning for climate change, what hazards may impact your site, if you are in a flood zone, and if you have flood insurance, as well as if you or someone within your organization is attending climate-focused events. If you need help with this section, examples are given in the questions. There's also a resource guide on the NJHT website, or the Historic Trust website, with additional resources to help you answer these questions mindfully. So this is the project concept and team section, which is another core evaluation section of the capital application. In this section, we are looking for a clear, concise, and detailed description of your proposed project and the qualifications of those that will be working on your project. So we ask questions regarding the goals of the project. You will need to submit the scope of work document as well as the project budget worksheet. We will ask if this is a standalone project or part of a larger, possibly multi-phase project. We ask about the project specifics, such as where the project is focused and what types of non-construction activities are related to the project. And you will be required to answer questions regarding the project timetable, cost estimates, as well as planning documents used to substantiate the proposed work. So it is important to note that the multi-phase application is a subcategory of the capital grant application. So multi-phase is within the capital grant application. And you will need to complete the same application as the other two capital grants, but additional questions will be generated when asked about the level of capital grant being applied for. Also, capital multi-phase grant projects have a minimum of 2 phases with a request of at least $500,000 per phase of work. So the proposed project must be at least $2 million in total, with $1 million per phase to be eligible for this grant subcategory. Each phase must be substantially complete before funding for the next phase will be available. And funding for future phases is based on future appropriations. Each phase must be individually outlined in your capital multi-phase budget Excel document, as you can see on the slide. An example of each tab you can see outlined in red. In addition to a worksheet for each phase, you must also submit a worksheet for the overall project. So each phase is broken out on the document, but there's also a tab for the entire project. And this year, we've included a specific section to archaeology within the capital grant. Here, we hope to get a sense of how archaeology has been incorporated into the preservation strategy of your site. We ask for information regarding previous archaeological investigations that have occurred in the site, if any, as well as other projects involving ground disturbance that are currently planned or being considered. This is all aimed at allowing us to understand how known or potential archaeological resources are being incorporated within either your current project plans or your long-term plans for the site. And not all projects will require the inclusion of archaeological investigation. If yours does not, due to a lack of proposed ground disturbance altogether, the preparation of planning document that does not require formal investigation in its scope, or the results of previous archaeological survey, to name a few examples, please be sure to describe this within this section of the application. And this is also a great place to let us know if you haven't yet had the need for a formal archaeological investigation, and if that's the case. Now, the next section is the project budget that includes questions about, you guessed it, your total project budget, as well as matching funds to complete your project. We ask that you provide the total project costs based on the documentation from professional cost estimators or contract proposals. In addition, please remember that your matching funds are dependent on the level capital grant you are applying for, and that if the project cost is more than the grant funds plus the required matching funds based on the grant type, your organization is responsible for closing that gap. For example, if you're getting a capital level 2 grant with an award of $750,000, the required match for the grant funded project is $750,000 for a $1.5 million project. If the project is in excess of that $1.5 million in this example, then the match required to complete the project would exceed the required 50% match and would be entirely the responsibility of your organization to fill the gap. So please include documentation of your matching funds or information about how you will raise the remaining matching funds for your project if not already in hand. And you can see the attachments checklist for information about which documentation to provide. And this is also the section where we ask about your match expended and require documentation of the expended funds that occurred between April 24th, 2023 and April 24th, 2025, the application deadline. Any expenses that occur after the application deadline should simply be included in your proposed project costs in the application. So again, any expenses that occur after the application deadline should be included in your proposed project costs in the application, not match expended. And remember that work must meet SOI standards and be no more than 25% of your total project costs to be considered for match expended. And to continue project budget, seen here is a capital budget worksheet Excel document. You or your consultant must complete this worksheet in accordance with CSI divisions or construction divisions, and they should be based on the professional cost estimates that you received. We highly suggest adding a contingency fee to the non-construction section, as it is important to note that we cannot increase your grant amount. So you should be considering the total project cost at the point at which your work will begin. Also to note is that this spreadsheet must directly correspond with the capital scope of work Word document included in attachment D. The next key section to the capital application is the public access and benefits section. We want to understand when you are open, what your vegetation is like, are you accessible, how is your resource interpreted to the public. We also want to know other information such as if your resource is currently included in a heritage initiative area, such as a certified local government program or Journey Through Jersey, to name a few. In addition, does your project meet the 2 special initiatives? And if so, how? The key to this section is to let us know how this proposed project impacts public access and/or benefit the resources visitors. And finally, from me and the capital application, the last section is about your organizational ability. Do you have the experience and know-how to manage the proposed project? We want to know information such as who works at your organization or volunteers in the organization and what their qualifications are. Do you have experience managing grants, whether they be of construction in nature or not? And do you have experience working with consultants? Do you have a maintenance plan that you abide to? We also want to know if you or your staff have been to any educational or professional development events such as the Trust Conference or even the Rutgers March webinars. And with that, are there any questions?
Yes, we do have a couple questions. Is a legislative grant able to be used as a match?
If by legislative grant you mean special appropriation within the state's legislation, then no, that cannot be used as a match. But Glenn, please feel free to add any contingencies to that.
I guess the one caveat I would add to that is if you're a state agency, because the only monies available to state agencies are state funds that come from legislative grants and other appropriations. So the only exception would be is if you're a state agency.
Okay, so we'll move on to the next question here. Please clarify the definition of money spent. Is it the date the invoice was paid or the date when the work was performed?
The intent of that is when the work was done. I mean, that's, you know, again, this is within the last 2 years, which is a fairly generous amount of time that we're accepting work being done. I don't know if the question pertains more to the work is being done, say, March 30th and applications are due the 24th of April, and we haven't paid yet because it's a month off. I guess, I mean, again, the intent is that the work's done within that 2-year period. That's match expended.
Okay. Is match expended limit 25% of match or 25% of grant amount or total project amount, meaning match plus grant?
So match expended is 25% of your total project cost. And it must take place between April 24th, 2023 and April 24th, 2025, the application deadline. So total project cost is key to match expended.
Okay. Can a house of worship apply for historical cemetery restoration?
You don't want to jump on this one, Jennifer? Generally speaking, and again, it'll come down to your specific cemetery and what's included. Yes, we've funded cemetery restorations in the past, but I do believe it depends on your specific cemetery. Are there chapels involved? Is there, you know, various religious service? So, I mean, I think we'd have to weigh that on an individual case basis, but we have funded cemetery restorations in the past for tombstones and landscape and that sort of thing. So,
okay. Can a smaller scale project with a multi-phase be accepted for a level 1 capital grant?
So the key here is the multi-phase. The multi-phase grants are limited to grant projects between $500,000 to $750,000. So each phase must be at least $1 million. So in this case, for capital level 1 grant, it would not be considered a multi-phase. So you would have to apply for each individual stage of the project.
So if they spend the match money to start and are reimbursed as they go up to the award amount, can you clarify that?
I think that's a correct statement. Yeah, because again, you have to expend the funds before you get them back. And you're basically, what you're getting back is our percent of the grant. So again, if you spend $100,000, is an invoice, you'll submit that to us. So you made that $100,000 payment, which again is coming out of your match, and then we will then basically reimburse you half of that, which is our part of the project. So we will reimburse you 50% or $50,000 minus our 5% retainage.
Okay. Can investments be used for matching amounts, or do the monies need to come from more of a capital campaign situation?
The purpose of the match is it's supposed to be match available to pay for your project. So if that investment you can take out of that investment, then yes, that could be part of your match. If you have a big endowment that you can't take anything out of, or just for specific purchase, then that might not be used as your match. So you have to document that the monies that you're using as match are available funds for the project.
Okay. Are there any special considerations in the application process for a small handful of resources that are not buildings or properties, such as ships, trains, locomotives?
So there are no specific questions aimed at those types of resources, but we do consider how unique the resource is when evaluating the application. And Glenn, if you would like to add anything onto that.
That's exactly what I was going to say. That's part of when you're looking at significance, the evaluators are looking at significance. Part of what they're looking at is how unique, how different, how significant that individual resource is. So other than that, though, it's just like any other National Register listed property. It's all looked at the same.
All right. If there are no more questions, then I would like to hand it off to my colleague, Tara.
All right, I'm not seeing any more questions. So hello, everyone. The light at the end of the application workshop tunnel is here. We just have a few more slides to get through before we go into our final Q&A section. So thank you everybody for sticking around with us. Now we're going to talk about what should be included in the second part of your application, the USB of attachments. Please note that if you have completed a Preserve New Jersey application in the past, some of the forms have been consolidated or feature new names. Okay, USB attachments. Each application should have one corresponding USB with all of the attachments on it. So if you're going to be applying for a capital grant and a historic site management grant, you should have one USB for your capital application with the relevant attachments and one USB for your historic site management application with the relevant attachments. To make sure that all of your documents are reviewed by staff and the evaluators, please make sure to create a table of contents or checklist of all the files included on the USB drive. And please make sure to organize your files as attachments A through attachments H, as you can see here on the screen. It also helps if you double check to make sure that you are able to open up all of your files. So if you can't see your files, we can't see the files, and neither can the evaluators. So please double check your submissions and be sure to note that it has all the relevant files on your application. In addition, any application received on a USB drive will not be reviewed. The USB is a separate part of your online application that must be delivered to the trust by 4 p.m. on April 24th. The materials you send to us must be in our hands by April 24th. So if you are mailing your USB, we highly, highly, highly recommend that you send it through certified mail and have tracking information to assure that it is received on time. I repeat, it must be in our hands on the 24th, not postmarked on the 24th. Any USB drive received after the application deadline will not be reviewed, and therefore your application will be considered incomplete. Moving on to the table of contents. Again, please include the table of contents organized by attachment type that reflects the documents you include on your USB. There is no need to over-organize this. Please place the proper materials into the proper attachments. The table of contents does follow the supporting document checklist that you will find a link for in your application. And please note that the attachments for each application vary slightly, so double check that you're reviewing and submitting the correct documents for your application. Okay, so what are these attachments? Here we're going to start with attachment A, or the applicant information. If you are a nonprofit organization, please include your IRS 501c determination letter. All applicants are required to submit an applicant's governing body or board resolution and an assurances form, which outlines who in your organization is able to sign the grant documents and also authorizes that there are or will be matching funds available to complete your proposed project. Yes, it is a combined form for now for those who have submitted applications in the past. And note, this governing body and board resolution and assurances form must be printed out, signed by hand, not digitally, scanned and uploaded onto the USB itself. For attachment B, or the property ownership section, any applicant who owns a resource can disregard this section. However, if you do not own your resource, you need to include your lease agreement and an owner approval form within attachment B on the USB drive. Please note that if you are applying for a municipal, county, or regional planning grant for a historic district nomination, you must have this form signed by the chief elected official of the municipality in which the district or project is in. So if the project overlaps community lines, you may need to submit multiple forms. Also, for capital projects specifically, if you do not own the resource and your lease term is less than 15 years, then you must have the owner of the property sign the joint signatory consent form certifying that the owner of the property is an eligible applicant themselves and that they consent to be a co-signer on this grant. Moving on to attachment C, or resource information and historic significance. So HSM, MCRP, or heritage tourism applicants must submit their most recent nomination form or their certificate of eligibility from the State Historic Preservation Office within attachment C on the USB drive. For capital projects, you must be listed on the state or national register individually or as a complementary contributing resource to receive this funding. So, a copy of your nomination form must be submitted within the USB on attachment C. However, if your nomination is set to go before the State Review Board very soon, please submit an acknowledgement letter from the New Jersey Historic Preservation Office certifying that your nomination is nearing listing. If you have any questions about this policy, please contact the trust staff. We are here to help you through all of this. In addition, if your project is considered a contributing resource to an eligible or listed historic district, please separate the pages relevant to your project site. Or often we have seen people highlight within the documents that call out specifically to your property. Put the focus on your site only. And a final note about attachment C, all proof of eligibility and or listing must be submitted to the trust staff by August 1st. But please do not wait to get this information from the Historic Preservation Office, as it could take upwards of 45 days to process your request. Okay. So attachment D for historic site management, heritage tourism, or municipal, county, regional planning. The required documents vary slightly between the different grant types, as you can see on the right. In general, though, attachment D, project concept and team should include a scope statement that identifies the exact work that will be completed using this grant funding. Please include all proposals and estimated fees for the proposed project, as well as all of the resumes for the proposed project team, such as consultants, architects, archaeologists, etc. If you have a selected team, the proposal should include cost estimates from the team you have selected, i.e. the proposals from the architects, archaeologists, etc. themselves. Please note that all consultants must demonstrate experience with historic preservation projects of the same or larger scope as proposed project and must meet the Secretary of Interior standards. If you do not have a consultant under consideration or a contract, please submit a document outlining the type of experience and qualifications you will be looking for when hiring a consultant and draft an RFP. The RFP should highlight the qualifications that you are looking for and what types of professionals you are seeking specifically. This is really important because you want your RFP to show the evaluators that you've thought through what specific components will apply to your project and that you are hiring the correct people for those types of jobs. So, for instance, are you applying for a capital grant for exterior work? Do you have a building that has a limestone facade? Are you looking for masons that have worked with stones before, like limestone? Have they worked on historic stuff before? Has their previous work met the Secretary of Interior standards? Be a little bit specific about exactly what you're looking for. And again, if you are new to this and you have no idea what you're looking for in a project team, give us a call. Again, we're here to help you through this process. Finally, if you have a historic structure report or a preservation plan already, you can add it here on attachment D. Please see the checklist on the right and the grant manual for more specific requirements for heritage tourism, municipal, county, regional planning, and other different projects that you can apply for. So moving on to attachment D, but specifically for capital grants. Please still include a scope statement, the resumes for qualified project team, proposed fees and planning documents such as preservation plans, conditions assessment, and construction documents. You are also more than welcome to submit draft RFPs if a consultant has not been selected yet as well. And to note, if you are applying for a multi-phase project, please include the cost estimates for the first phase, which would be this application, and all subsequent phases. If you are applying for a multi-phase project, please include a contingency plan. It could take some time for you to start construction or receive funds, and in that period of time, costs can change. Again, it's important for you to demonstrate to the evaluators that you've really thought through the project. Okay, attachment E. Attachment E, or the project budget, also varies between the different planning grants and capital grants. So for planning grants, including the historic site management, municipal, county, regional planning, and heritage tourism, please attach the project expenditure worksheet. This document will help you outline the proposed work items and the project costs for these work items. This form is very helpful for you and the evaluators, especially if you are seeking to fund more than one final product with this grant. For example, a preservation plan and construction documents, or if there is more than one proposal for the proposed project. Attachment E for capital. So for capital projects, you should include documentation of any match expended if applicable and work completed with this match expended. So again, the match expended is any expenditure paid before that due date of April 24th in the 2-year period. Documentation includes signed contracts, invoices, and proof of payment, but please note that you should censor or remove any bank account numbers or anything you don't want the public to see on these documents, because again, we are a public agency and our documents can be requested at any time. In addition, if you have State Historic Preservation Office authorization for the proposed project, this is the place to add it. Please include before and after photos of the work completed as match expended. Finally, for attachment E, in addition to the match expended, please include the capital budget worksheet as seen in the photo on the right. This form breaks down the project costs by construction divisions and helps you and the evaluators understand the total project costs. This form is also helpful because if funded, it will then be translated into a form within your grant agreement. Now, if you are applying for a multi-phase grant, please complete a budget worksheet for each phase of your project. You will actually see different tabs at the body of the Excel document for this information. Excuse me. Okay, so attachment F, organization ability. Please include supplemental information such as maintenance plans, the resumes and credentials of your project team and manager. also known as the people who will be administering the grant within their organization. If you are a nonprofit, please include your organization's current year-to-date balance sheet as well as past year's balance sheet so that we can see if your organization will be able to provide matching funds and has the organizational ability to complete this project. County or municipal government applicants must provide a governing body resolution committing specific matching funds, and multi-phase applicants must provide documentation of match in hand for these phase and subsequent phases. If you are applying for an MCRP grant and you have an advisory or a historic commission, please also include information on this committee within Attachment F. Okay. Attachment G, or public access and benefit. You can see on the slide that it varies slightly between the grant types again, so please refer to your checklist at the end of the grant application when assembling your USB attachments. Overall, though, all applicants should include letters of support for your organization and/or support for the project. Your community is a great place to start with this. We highly recommend that you reach out to your local legislators, such as the mayor, council people, and representatives. If you do not know who your local legislators are, there is a question early on in the application that will lead you right to them. But please note that these letters are very important to the evaluators because our grant program is very competitive. So these letters show our evaluators that there is emphasis on diverse community involvement and legislator involvement and awareness for your project. These letters should not only express that there is support for your project, but more importantly, that there is support for your organization and that your organization is a valuable asset to your community. In addition to letters of support, please also include press releases, news articles, event flyers, etc. These can be simple as screenshots of social media posts or can be scans of physical handouts. These items demonstrate the role of your organization plays within your community. For the municipal, county, regional planning applicants, public meeting agendas and sign-in sheets for these meetings where the proposed projects were discussed should be included. And for heritage tourism, please provide documentation on your visitor readiness. If you have any questions about visitor readiness, please refer to the grant manual for more information, or you can contact Ashley, whose contact information will be at the very end of the slideshow. Okay, and finally, for attachment H, please add your photos in JPEG or PNG format. We really, really want to emphasize JPEG or PNG. Please take note of the requested photos shown on this slide. Again, please take note of the requested photos listed on this slide. These photos are really important. Our evaluators, given that they are from out of state, are not able to see your site or visit your site before making their decisions. So please, these photos are a stand-in for the evaluators. Include pictures that provide context to the area of your site. Is your site a contributing resource to a historic district? Would a picture of the streetscape give more of a sense of the historic character of the area? Attachment H is also a really great place to add other miscellaneous documents, including historic photos and historic newspaper articles or drone surveys, for example. Okay, so this part is pretty important, how to set your application apart. Again, we receive over 100 applicants a year, so this is really important. We all have a good understanding about what should be included on each USB drive, so now time to review your work and learn how to set it apart. Applications that are considered strong are well written and concise. First, we always recommend that you read through all of the questions before writing your responses so that you can get a sense of what information is appropriate to include and also give structure to the overall narrative of your application. And again, we have reduced the word count in recent years, so please focus on what is specific and original to you. Please remember that we see upwards of 100 applications a year, so if the evaluators have to read pages and pages and pages of materials to understand the significance of your resource and what your proposed project is, then it's highly unlikely during this discussion time that they will remember the relevant details. One thing my mom used to say to me when I was growing up was keep it pithy, so short and sweet and get to the point. As a result, please have a clearly defined scope of work based on planning documents. If you do not have planning documents to support your capital needs, or if they are more than 10 to 15 years old, please call us and talk to us. Again, we are here to help you. So strong applications have letters of support from their community and their legislators. Again, we want to hear from the people in your community that not only your resource, but your organization are important. So remember, strong applications also have compelling photos. So again, the evaluators are not going to be visiting your site in person, excuse me. So they've never seen it before, so your photos should be clear and depict your site. The last things a potential applicant should do before submitting anything is to check your project budget numbers in the attachments and on the application. Again, please use the checklist to make sure that you have all the required information included with your application, because any information submitted after the grant deadline will not be accepted. And again, the deadline is April 24th. Finally, please make sure you can open your attachments. Again, if you can't open your attachments, we can't either, and neither can the evaluators. Okay, so virtual office hours. Now, if there are any questions that come up as you're completing your application, we are going to be hosting virtual office hours every other Thursday from 1 to 2 p.m. beginning on February 13th. Different staff members will be present during each of the office hours. So again, if you have a question that pertains more to heritage tourism, it may be beneficial to go to a session where Ashley is present. Or if you have any questions relating to archaeology, you should attend one where Alexis is present. All the session information, including the staff who will be present during the session, will be made available on our website. Okay, and if you are unable to attend the office hours, or you have a question that you can't wait for the office hours, then here is our staff contact information. If you do not have enough time to jot this information down, don't worry, the information is always posted on our website at www.njhd.org, and this presentation will be made available as early as next week. So now we're going to be entering the final Q&A section, so if you have any remaining questions, please enter them in the chat below. Are
Okay,
there any
let's go
questions
ahead.
on attachments?
We do have some questions. Are there any previous successful applications that are made publicly available for a new applicant to take a look at?
Again, I mean, these are, documents that are here in the office. So if you wanted to come into the office to review, these documents, they would be available to you. I do warn you though, that just because it was successful for one doesn't mean it will be successful for you. Each project is very specific, and they may be emphasizing certain aspects, in their application for their project, which may have no relevance to your project. So yes, if you want to come in to look at previous applications, by all means, you can do so. But again, I warn you that that's, just because they got a grant doesn't mean that if you copy everything that you're going to get a grant. Make sure it's specific to your specific project, and your team, and all of that. So that's all that stuff that everyone's been talking about. It's not just one aspect of the application that will get you over that finish line. And so actually, that's the answer to that question. I just wanted, before we move on for any other questions, as Tara mentioned, the office hours, we found last year that some people wanted to tune in just to hear other people's questions, because then it became relevant maybe to their applications as well. So even if you want to just tune in just to see what's being asked, and maybe that might trigger some questions you might have as well, feel free to log on as many times as you want. You don't have to be a one and done. But also, as Tara mentioned, you could call us anytime or reach out via email anytime to ask us any questions. But we did find last year that the office hours were quite successful with people. So we wanted to offer them again this year.
Okay. I will also add to that the office hours are not recorded, so I really encourage everybody to come because they will not be posted. However, there was somebody looking for questions on this webinar, so I just want to reiterate that this recording will be up on YouTube and on our website, as well as a PDF copy of the slideshow. So that will be made available to you probably sometime early next week. Let's see here. Next question. For the legislative grant, was that being able to be used as a match? That question, the answer might have been missed earlier. So can we repeat that, please?
Yeah, the answer to that is no. Legislative grants, line item grants from appropriation bills cannot be used as match. The one exception to that is if you're agency of state government, because the only access for funding for state agencies are legislatively. So that's the one exception to accepting it as match, is if you're a state agency.
All right, thank you. Are the reviewer relative value or the points that are given to each application section made available?
We follow.
So our evaluators do kind of rank each application, and it is given a number, but I don't believe that there is relative value attached. So I don't know if anyone can provide a little
Yeah,
more
I mean, they're
information.
looking at stuff and providing, basically what they end up doing is coming up with a list of projects that are recommended for funding at the end. They're using methods just to, again, keep track of what they think is pluses and minuses for each one. It's not, again, a value ranking is not really relevant to the end result. It's more whether they think it's a fundable, deserving project or not. With regards to going back to our question about available to see previous applications, I was just notified that I think we actually have to OPRA that, use the Open Public Meetings record, but contact us first if you do have a specific question regarding that.
Okay, so we don't have any open questions. However, I have a few questions that were submitted prior to the webinar that I would like to put forward. Are there funds that are made available for stabilization of a historic structure? And if so, what are the requirements?
A structure like a building, object, I mean, they're all, accepted by the National Register. So it's basically the same type of application in what you have to address, whether it's the structure, if you mean by structure like a barn or that sort of thing. But again, if we're missing the point, feel free to reach right out to one of our program officers, and we'll try to answer that question directly if we missed a point.
Okay. What support is made available for museum startup expenses?
From our program, again, unless I'm missing the question, none. Our programs are going for basically the restoration of historic building structures, that sort of stuff. So it's documents that could pertain to that, but we don't provide any kind of operating funds. If it's something like that, you might want to look to the New Jersey Historical Commission or perhaps the Arts Council. But startup funds, as for me, no, that's outside the purview of this program.
Okay, thank you. So municipality opportunities for grants, is there one for the relocation of endangered and floodplain area historic properties?
With regards to, I mean, I don't think we've ever paid for the moving of a building. I mean, dealing with floodplains and stuff like that, where a building might be lifted higher and stuff. Again, that's part of rehabilitation, which is a fundable exercise. I think it's going to depend specifically on your project and whether that is eligible or not, but that would fall under rehabilitation. But Jennifer, I don't know if you want to touch on some of the documents that are out there that might be worth looking at before going too far into it.
Yeah, sure. So the New Jersey Historic Preservation Office has the Flood Mitigation Guide for Historic Properties, which is available on their website. And they also have design elevation guidelines on their website as well for historic properties. So if moving or I guess increasing the height of your property is part of your plans, then I would consult these documents, consult with us, and consult with HPO as soon as possible so that we can get you right on track so that you are not affected by the next flooding event.
Okay, that was it for the questions that I had that were pre-submitted, and we don't currently have any open questions.
If that is the case, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us. I know this is not a short webinar, But again, our application is not quick, easy, quick to do either. So we want to make sure we do spend enough time on it to try to help you guys out as much as possible. But as we've said throughout this presentation, all the staff is available for any questions, specific questions you might have. And we look forward to seeing your applications. And thank you. And again, this will be available, both the slideshow itself as well as the recording of this will be available by next week on our website. So thank you all, and good luck.